In any field, in business, in any kind of entertainment, in general conversation, humor is a terrifically good tool for solving all sorts of problems.
Welcome to the Humourology podcast with me, Paul Boross, and my glittering lineup of guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, who are going to share their wisdom and their use of humour with you. Humourology is the study of how humour can dramatically improve your business and your life. Humourology puts the fun into business fundamentals, increases the value of your laughing stock, and puts a punchline back into your bottom line. Please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. My guest on this edition of the Humourology podcast is the multi-award-winning producer behind such humorous hits as Blackadder, QI, Spitting Image, and Not the 9 O'Clock News. When he's not acting as the creative force behind high-quality comedy-packed programmes, you can hear him as the presenter of BBC Radio 4's The Museum of Curiosity. Throughout his career, he has earned a plethora of BAFTAs for comedy and advertising, plus a Grammy and an Emmy. In 2011, he was appointed Commander of the British Empire for his legendary work producing television and radio. He politely professes to be the Professor of Ignorance, but he sure knows plenty about producing a punchline and creating comedy gold. John Lloyd, welcome to the Humourology podcast.
Hello, Paul.
Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. I want to start at the beginning, really. The Jesuits say, "Give me a child of 7 and I will give you the man." Was the 7-year-old John Lloyd humorous?
Well, I do remember my early childhood being extremely funny. I remember the whole family would be in hysterics quite often. My dad was Anglo-Irish, and we used to every year go to County Wexford and County Waterford and Tipperary and visit all the mad rallies. And we would go to Church of Ireland, we're prods, in my cousin and my godmother's pony and trap. And the horse would always fart as we were sitting there in our little Sunday best, and the horse would fart. So we were laughing when we went into the church. And the vicar was incredibly short-sighted and used to read the Bible like this, literally with his nose on the page. And we would just be hooting and, gurgling all the way through. So I remember that my dad was funny. And I was good at, I was always been good at voices, so I was one of those kids who would, get laughs by impersonating teachers and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it starts young. It's a bit like a curiosity, that I've always been very curious because my dad was in the Navy. We were often on troop ships and on long, long car journeys in what they used to call a station wagon. And so I was often not at school. I didn't really go to school properly until I was 9.5. We were always, being pulled out of a school and then traveling for a while and finding another one. And my mum used to teach us in the car on board these troop ships by giving us quizzes. Okay, so kids, give us 3 trees beginning with E, and so I think I'm hardwired for that. And actually it was a bit of a shock, going to school, having to sit down and shut up and sit in rows and do what you're told. So I've always had a kind of anti-authoritarian kind of streak, really. I don't like to be told. I like to be, told to get on with it, really, which is the way I was, trained at the BBC. A guy came into the writer's room and said, would you like to be a producer? And I said, not really, sir. Well, they all seem very old to me and tweedy. What do they do? And he said, well, it's quite easy, really. You just make stuff you like. What, that I like? Yeah, that's the idea. Because if you don't like it, how can you guarantee anyone else will? So that's the way I was trained. And I made 100 radio programs in my first year. I got completely hooked. I was a very lazy school child and very slack student. And I found my vocation at 22 and just lived by this thing. I just make stuff that I like. And that's what I've always done.
So it's gut instinct a lot of the time, but humor is at the core of that. You kind of passed over and went from school straight into work, but I'm interested because you were sent away to public school, and you talk about a period of that being like a prison sentence. Was humor important to the survival mechanism whilst you were there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, prep school was very tough, but 10-year-old boys are pretty tough. In my, a lot of rugby, a lot of being, freezing cold, not much food, lots of fighting, and all that. But actually, it was great. Little boys don't mind a scrap. You have a punch up with your best friend, and then you're friends again, and adventures in the woods and collecting fir cones and iron bars and, playing war games and all that. That was great, actually. It was really, I remember it being really good fun. Public school was difficult because it was the middle of the 60s, and at King's Canterbury, we were all dressed like little Neville Chamberlains, in wing collars and boaters. And all we wanted to do was go and listen to rock music and the sort of, the calves and all that, and that wasn't allowed. And then you got jeered at by the sort of townies and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of ridiculous when you're 15 being told to change into your pajamas and being given 6 by your housemaster for something that you hadn't actually even done. I found that very difficult, that you weren't treated, you were treated like an object, really. My wife said, you should tell Paul the story of when you did I've Never Seen Star Wars. Did you ever hear that program?
Yes, I remember it.
It's really good fun. You undertake to do 5 things you've never done before. With Marcus Brigstock.
He's brilliant, Marcus.
He's a lovely man, isn't he? And anyway, you undertake to do 5 things you've never done. And I agreed to watch The Wire, which I'd never seen, read The Curious Incidents of a Dog in the Nighttime, which I'd never read, milk a goat, which obviously I'd never done, do 5 minutes of stand-up, which I'd never done either. They were astonished to think that I'd never actually technically done stand-up. Most terrifying experience of my entire life. And the last thing was go back to school, which I had built up this idea that I hated school. And 40 years, it was 40 years to the year that I went back to the school. And I suddenly realized I didn't hate it at all. I hated some of it, but a lot of it was great and really entertaining and fun. I had great friends and put on plays and all that. And that's a funny thing in life, that you get lifted this weight of what you see as your formative years being awful was not true. And it really let lightness into my heart, after 40 years of being resentful about it. It's extraordinary the stories we tell ourselves about who we are that aren't actually true.
Well, that's right. Psychologically, we reinvent our past, don't we, in our heads. I'm interested when you talk about that you suddenly learned that teaching could be another thing, because both on QI and the Museum of Curiosity, there's like an inherent feeling that you're with the best teacher you ever had, because you make everything fascinating. And I think that's by using enthusiasm and humor to bring it to life. Do you think humor helps people retain knowledge, and that's the way things should be taught?
Who doesn't like the teacher who was funny? I mean, humor is one of the great weapons in life. I mean, I would say the other one is interestingness. I mean, I passionately believe that QI isn't just a silly panel game and its sister program, Museum of Curiosity, but that interestingness is a panacea. It's the solution to everything, because if you're interested in someone, you can't murder them. It's the way that the really bad things, wars and genocide, those kind of things happen because the other side, the victims, are demonized and treated as less than human. The minute you're interested in someone, suddenly you find a bond. And it's said to be the case that if somebody ever tries to mug you, the first thing to do is not run away or stand up to him, just say, "How's your mum?" And it completely destabilizes the guy. And he goes, "Well, she's fine." And then suddenly you're 2 human beings again. But aside from interestingness, I mean, definitely humor is in any field, in in business, in any kind of entertainment, in general conversation. Humor is a terrifically good tool for solving all sorts of problems. I was just thinking this morning that there's an ethnic group called the Mbuti in the Congo, or the Bambuti, and they used to be called the Pygmies. We don't call them that now, but they're very short ethnically, and they don't have any hierarchies at all. They have no kings and presidents and rulers, and all disputes are solved by humor. They all sit down, and supposing there's an argument about who's got the banana or whatever it is, or where's the goat. I don't know how they live, but if there's some sort of dispute, they sit on the ground and they solve it by humor. They get people to laugh, and everything is better again. And similarly, I do occasionally do public speaking, and there is nothing like jokes in any context, in a conference or any sort of business proposition. And I was a commercials director for about 12 years in the days when British comedy advertising was the best in the world, in the late 80s and early 90s. There were not many of us, but the traction that we used to get, because if you can put a proposition with humor, it goes in deep and people remember it. It's a very, very effective thing. I mean, that's not why I do it. I mean, I do it because I love to laugh, and it's great fun, and I love the fact that it cheers people up. Principally, that's what I've got it down to, is that's a good thing to do. I was kind of ashamed when I left Cambridge, and my friends all went off to become bankers and doctors and serious things, and I was larking around making silly jokes on the radio. And I sort of, this is a slightly embarrassing, it's just a kind of hobby that I'm paid to do. But over the years, I've thought, short of being a doctor or some kind of healer or carer, there's not really a better way of spending your life than making people more cheerful than they were before they listened to or watched the program. It's great. It's a harmless thing. And, I was supposed to be a lawyer. That's what I read at Cambridge. But I was very quickly aware I was going to be a lousy lawyer. Apart from anything else, I couldn't bear the idea of, what if I lost a case I should have won? What if I won a case that I should have lost? I would have possibly ruined somebody's life. Whereas if a joke doesn't land, well, it's not the end of the world, it's slightly embarrassing, but it's not worse than that.
Well, I'm really interested. You talked about bonding, and I think that's the quickest way that people bond is when you laugh together. It's the ultimate bond. And I think that, the whole Humourology project is predicated around the fact of that it's not just about laughing, it's about good humor. It's bringing niceness, kindness back into the world.
So true.
And, yeah, you talk a lot about that you learnt that it was more important to be kind than important. Can you talk about that?
I had a kind of ridiculous first 15 years of my working life when I was lucky enough to work with some extraordinarily talented people, and I worked very, very hard. I missed everybody's weddings, and worked all the weekends and did 5 different jobs at once, and then I ran out of road when I was 42, ironically, and I woke up one morning, I couldn't see the point of anything. And so I had to reset all the dials. It was very difficult. The first 3 years particularly were pretty miserable. And I couldn't understand what had happened, because it was ridiculous, because I had everything. I had kids, I had a, lovely flat and a car and just what my room in those days had awards everywhere. I won a lot of awards in advertising and in television, and that's how I defined myself, of things. I achieved these things, and I just thought, is this all I am? 100 pieces of cardboard in glass frames, is that me? And I remember during that crisis suddenly thinking, cheerfulness, that's a thing. that would be a good thing to be, rather than what I used to value as intelligence. I like to win arguments or do well at quizzes, or determination and that kind of stuff. No, just being cheerful, that's a great thing to do. And then off that comes kindness, and gentleness, that kind of thing, rather. And these were revelations to me. It had never occurred to me that cheerfulness was an actively good thing to do, because I used to be known as Mr. Grumpy, or Terry Tension, I was sometimes known as, because I was always like focused on, we've got to get this right, we've got to get the job done. And now I think, no, it's much more important to be cheerful and kind. That's what makes the world tick along nicely.
Well, I think that's really interesting. And from a psychological standpoint, I think there's a saying in psychology, which is that if you want anybody to go into any state, you have to go into that state first. So actually you can change other people's lives by being cheerful and kind, because that's what they'll do. And you talked about, being Mr. Grumpy and everything. Well, guess what? Actually, then you're leading other people into that way. And so I think it's very important for leaders to understand something that you came to, that actually, if you're going to lead and you want an organization to really flourish, kindness and cheerfulness are probably paramount.
And respect. I think it was John Locke, the philosopher, who said, he who would have his son respect him must have a great deal of respect for his son. And we were pretty lousy parents at the beginning, because we were both my wife was a very successful publisher, and we thought, the thing to do is tell people what to do, and they do it. The children don't think like that. I want to bounce on the bed. No, you're not allowed to. Well, I'm going to. Well, no, you. So, and now that we run Quite Interesting Limited, our company, which makes QI and everything together, and I often say I wish that I'd learned how to run a company properly before I was a parent, because the way the company is run is when the people arrive, they're told, first of all, they're all very keen to do the job because they've seen the program. It's been their dream to be a QI elf, as we say. And I give them a little hour's induction talk where I say, the first thing is, we want to know what you think. Like when I was told as a radio producer, this, don't try and guess what I find interesting. Do what you find interesting. We're interested in you. You never always feel you can speak out about anything. We want to know what everybody thinks. And it's sometimes quite difficult to get people to be brave, to stand up to the boss, but that's the way we work. And, the office is like a really cozy, it's a bit like this room here. It's got, nice rugs and sofas, and people are encouraged. They can lie on the sofa and read if that's how they want to do their research. So it's like being at home, really. And there is no hierarchy. It's a very flat hierarchy. Everybody is respected. You're told you're here because we think you're brilliant and we like you, so just be yourself. And it is quite extraordinary how, with that, I would call it love and encouragement, how people blossom. They become the people that we could all become, which, they're easy in their skin, they are modest, they're hardworking, they're very engaged what they do. It's really miraculous, whereas as a parent, it's you think it's all about control, and it's not. Everything about parenting is a business of getting out of the way. The children are fine. Make sure they've got enough food and they don't hurt themselves. And otherwise, just encourage them. That's all you have to do. Instead of getting angry and, and frightened and, resentful and all the things people do and telling them what to do. Children learn by example. That's the only way they ever learn. And so the interesting thing about parenting, it is the parents who need to grow up. And that if you're any good at it, we're a pretty happy family these days. And it's all about because the parents have finally tried to be grown up and treat children. I often say children are not stupider than you. They know less things and they're shorter, but otherwise they're in many ways brighter. Children ask all the right questions. you know, and we beat that out of them at school, you know, because questioning, you know, what is true is not generally encouraged in schools. And, you know, people who do well in life often don't do very well at school, because they say, well, why that's a silly way of doing it. I'd rather do this. No, you're not allowed to do that. The great philosophy ideas are incredibly simple, but they're often counterintuitive. Like that idea is, in a family with children, the children are fine, the parents need to behave like adults, finally. And, you know, it's like everybody shouts at their children, or most people that I've ever met, at some point. And the thing is, if you shout at your children, they will not get good at what you're shouting at them about. They will only become skilled at shouting. Yes. And that's what happens. So you get caught in this sort of hamster wheel of all the things, and you catch yourself as a parent speaking like your dad. You know, how dare you speak to me like that? Go to your room. What did I say that? I even had my father's voice for a moment, you know.
People sometimes say to me when I'm lecturing at conferences, and I'm sure you've had this as well, isn't a lot of what you're saying common sense? And I always say, no, it's uncommon sense.
Yes.
People only know it when you point it out to them. And I think what you're saying, I know you're fond of what Plato said, that early education should be a form of
play.
Because
that way you will be better able to discover the child's natural bent. And if there was a QI school, which has always been the dream within the company to start a school, that's what you would do. The first 2 years, you would just watch everybody, and you'd think, okay, she's a mathematician, no doubt about that, and he's going to be a drummer, and you know, she's very good at organizing things. She's probably going to be some sort of manager or producer. And then what you would do is you would only examine the children on the subjects that they were passionate about. So you would decide, I'm a mathematician, and that's what I do. And you would fast track them. They'd still have to go to history and geography and English, but that wouldn't be tested. It would just be fun. And what I think would happen is that, because the mathematicians aren't interested in history, they're interested in numbers, but you skew the history to, you know, people in history or mathematicians. You tell them stories. And after a while, the historians start thinking, that maths thing, I think I'd like to have a go at that. You know, rather than telling everybody must do 10 GCSEs and everybody's supposed to get an A in all of them. And that's not the way life works. We all have preferences, you know, we're better at some things than others. And why should people have to do subjects? I was terrible at maths, but I only got interested in maths in my 40s when, because of this midlife crisis, I thought, okay, there's something wrong here, something badly wrong. I've got everything and I'm not happy, and I don't know why. So I started reading philosophy for the first time, and physics, and I want to work how the world actually physically works and what's the best way of navigating it. You know, how do you live an optimal life?
I'm very interested because you were talking about, you know, children and how they learn best and everything. And I wonder if this can be crossed over into company culture and creativity, because I think one of the biggest problems in cultures in big companies is they lose that ability to be creative. And I'm wondering if you think that attitude and humor has an impact on allowing people to fulfill their creative potential, I suppose.
Well, of course, because we are a company that essentially does comic things, you know, podcasting, theatre, television, radio, books, you know, our job is to make people laugh as well as make them interested. So it's not surprising that there's a company Zoom going on today and people will be laughing a lot, you know, because they'll be talking about interesting, funny things and so forth. So that's a good base. Perhaps more difficult if you're making electrical fitments or more difficult. But, you know, here's the thing, Paul, you know, because as I mentioned, my dad was in the Navy, so we traveled all my childhood. And the last thing I wanted to do with my gap year was go traveling. I wanted to earn some money. So I got a job as a tea boy for a local Essex builder called Mac. And that's what I did for a year. And, eventually they used to let me drive the minivan and pick up the cement. And then you taught me how to do plastering and tiling and all that, rub down doors. And it was the best job, honestly, I've ever had. It's very satisfying, that sort of craft work, because you look back at the end of the day at the roof you've just built or the wall you've painted, and you think, we did that. And then you go to the pub. And the guys, they were all much older than me. I was only 18 or something. And they were so funny, these guys. They were very good at their jobs. They were sort of, I guess, you call them working class Tories probably, but they're all very good people. They were all, nearly all of them are volunteer firemen in their spare time. They were all extremely bright and funny. We laughed all the time, and of course they teased me rotten because I was a long-haired lefty, but we all became very good friends. And that's one of the things I think makes me a reasonably good producer, is I like my audience. When I have to think, those are the people, those working class people who didn't do well at school because they weren't taught properly, but the native intelligence, as I often say, is like, you watch an electrician and a plumber, trying to rewire a house, the intelligence there, the problem solving gift is extraordinary. And I lost every argument I had with these guys over lunch, we'd argue about politics. And I lost all the time because they were very clever people. And that's the thing, why I'm professor of ignorance, is everybody's ignorant, but very few people are actually stupid, unless you're brain damaged. It's the ignorance that's the problem.
Do you think that over time, and now we're getting into political realms, my father, God rest his soul, he used to say, he was a Hungarian refugee, he used to say, and we used to talk about a lot, that we want to keep the public ignorant because it's easier to control an ignorant public. Do you think that's a basic problem with society, is that they don't want people to be educated because it's easier to control them?
Well, I know, I'm not going to name him, but a very senior figure in broadcasting is a friend of mine, says that the education system is exactly that, because if people were properly educated, they'd be furious about the way the country is run. It is, and why I'm so keen and passionate on education is that I think some executives think that QI is like for professors, is that professors are the last people who like QI because they go, it's not really the 9th century, very much more the 8th century. I think you'll find the Vikings really flourished. And you said 9th century, and that's not right. They will be fussy about it. The people who love QI are cab drivers, and your brickies, who struggled at school because nobody's understood. They thought in a different way to the standard way, and they just soak up information. I mean, I love black cab drivers particularly because probably that they've got a bit of their brain, because the knowledge is so hard to do. They've got a bigger, I think it's the hypothalamus or something like that, in the back of their brain that's bigger than other people's. And they're very, very bright guys and very determined people. It's a high calling. And it's such a shame that we waste people's natural abilities, particularly because we're still teaching people as if we have an empire, and you want to divide your cattle essentially into two kinds: the people who can process vast amounts of very dull information carefully and accurately so they can become imperial civil servants or bankers or corporate lawyers. Those are the people who get all the straight A's. And the other people who can mend things and drive trucks and push wheelbarrows around, and who are not required to think other than just do that. And it's kind of crazy. What we really need is more guitarists and more novelists and more creative people, more comedians, because that's one of the things that Britain is very good at. We are for reasons we don't really understand, a very creative company. After finance, our second biggest export is not tractors or, manganese nodules. It is IP. It's movies, it's actors, it's books, it's formats, music. In Britain, Britain's got about 1% of the world's population, but we deliver something like 10% of the world's music. I mean, that is astonishing, isn't it?
Oh, it is astonishing. And talking of music, your son Harry has this actors band, Waiting for Smith, which is fantastic music and really. Can you tell me a little bit more? Because I know that you've taken over the role of manager as well.
Yeah, that's right. I'm Brian Ego. Brian Ego's the name. Lovely boys, very talented. Did I mention the rider? It's the M&Ms, no green ones, all right, because if you put green ones in, they'll walk off. So I kind of take that persona and quite carry it off at festivals sometimes, just for fun. Brian Ego's the name, lovely. Yeah, so Harry is, well, it all fits together. So Harry's a classic thing of what I'm talking about. I have two daughters who are, all my kids are wonderful. My daughters are, neat and tidy and diligent. And they're happy to sit down and do the work properly and carefully. And they're very, very bright and all that. Both got very good degrees. And Harry's like me. He can't go to work if he doesn't believe in it. I couldn't do maths and I just clocked off, But if I'm committed to something, I give in 150%, and Harry's the same. So when he discovered rugby, the first rugby match he was in, he scored 5 tries and was the man of the match. And nobody had spotted him before. And then he did that for ages. And then he discovered acting, Again, all these things are not, you'd think, they're extracurricular, aren't they? Those aren't things you have a career on. But of course you can be an international rugby player or a very successful actor and make a lot of money and give a lot of people pleasure. Why these things are considered not proper education is completely beyond me. So, for example, he's extremely dyslexic, but he's very bright. And so he was nearly 17 before they sent him to an educational psychologist to find out why he was mucking around all the time. And what it was, a distraction, because he didn't want to be forced to read because he'd make a mess of it. He would muck around and be sent out of the class. So we were astonished when he got 3 A levels. They weren't great grades. In French, he got a C in. And he didn't want to go to university, not even slightly interested. But he loved skiing. So he went off to Argentina and did his British qualifications one summer. And then for 2 years trained in Val d'Isère and various places and really, really punishing high-end top-level skiing, and became a French ski instructor in his late teens, which is the proudest moment of my life. It's what I always wanted to do. And he had the red jacket, which he's always wanted since he was a little boy. And his C in French obviously wasn't a lot of help, but after 5 months, he came back after his first season speaking more or less perfect French. My wife was an au pair, so she speaks very good. We were astonished. How's he done that? So the next year, he taught a lot of Russians because he was working in Courchevel. And he said to the ski school, I'd like to learn Russian because, I teach a lot of kids and it's hopeless with a 5-year-old doesn't speak any English and I'm left with them all day. So he took himself off to St. Petersburg. They recommended a school, got a flat, came back 10 weeks later speaking Russian. And now he speaks bits, get this, of 18 languages. He speaks bits of Bulgarian and Japanese, Croatian, all the obvious ones, Greek, Italian, Spanish, not to all the same level. His French is excellent. His Russian's pretty good. But he gets by in most languages. He's the kind of person after 2 weeks, he'll be able to have a conversation with a water ski instructor in their own language, Now, what's happened there that a guy that smart, a natural linguist, that nobody spotted that? Because he couldn't read. And he used to, when he was trying to be an actor, he failed all the auditions because in most schools, they give you a piece to read. And Harry wasn't very good at reading. When he discovered a teacher who said, no, don't worry about reading, Harry, just muck around, do it, pretend you're that. And he was a natural actor. Anyway, so he did that for about 5 years. And then one horrible experience, he broke his back in a horrible skiing accident and actually was technically dead for a few minutes on the operating table. It was really horrible. And so he started all over again. And he'd always, he taught himself to play the piano as a teenager, to muck around. And so for a year, he lay mainly in bed, and a guy came around from the local village and taught him the guitar. And so we started, he's eventually came up with this name, Waiting for Smith. The first drummer that we found that we liked was called Smith, James Smith. And he was always late for every single gig and rehearsal. And we always used to say, why we was hanging around waiting for Smith? Oh, that's a good title. James is now a rather successful record executive in New York. And he loves the idea that the band's named after him. Anyway, so yeah, Waiting for Smith. Harry is, again, I often say, obviously I cannot forget the day I first saw Rowan Atkinson, who's been a big part of my life. And I went to see the Oxford Review at the Edinburgh Festival that had originally had 8 people in it. And Rowan had decided 6 of them weren't funny, and it would basically just be him and Richard Curtis. And it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life to that point, I just thought, this guy's, forget Chaplin and Harold Lloyd, and this guy's the funniest thing I've literally ever seen. And I feel like that about Harry's music, is like, I'm not doing it out of pity. I want to say to the man from the Times, I'm doing it out of greed, because I think Harry's going to get really successful, because his music, thank you for saying that, I love it. I can't get it out of my head. And he's basically working out of time, because if he'd been working in 1972, he would be famous by now, because very few people can write melodies like that. And it's not the prevailing wind, grime and rap and all that sort of stuff that doesn't particularly interest Harry is the thing that everybody seems to want. And it's a very difficult process, because I don't know if you know this, Paul, but every day, guess how many songs are uploaded to Spotify? New songs.
Oh, I hate to think it's got to be in the thousands, hasn't it?
Yes, 80,000 a day.
Oh my goodness, 80,000
What
a
are
day.
the chances of getting noticed? It's very small.
Well, I think he's got a great chance of getting noticed. And just let's have a quick listen to one of my absolute favorites, So Much Love.
I went down like a domino. I've seen things you don't want to know, and I've heard of people that never grow. I know my pain, it is a gift. I've felt the blood from the offering, and I'm ready for death when it comes for me. So can't you see? So much love, feel it in my arms and legs and toes. For you, this is so much love, so why won't you let me through?
I just love that song, John. I can see so much love coming from you for your son, for Harry, for Waiting for Smith, but I can also see so much love coming from the public, because that's a great song.
Yeah, it's very catchy, and it's very warm. And Harry's mission is he doesn't want to be famous because he wants to be rich and admired. He wants to, because he wants to spread joy. That is his stated ambition. He wants to, like, I am very happy that I cheer people up when I do, and Harry wants to do that in the same way. He wants to both to make people tap their feet and enjoy the music, but also to understand that he also has pain, has had difficulties in his life, and we all do. And that's what great pop songs are, aren't they? They're wonderfully uplifting tunes about something very sad and serious. It's a strange paradox, that,
It's a wonderfully evocative as well. What makes you laugh, John?
Well, that's a hard question, because of course a lot of humor is that it's unpredictable. It's the surprise, like you just threw that at me and I was surprised and I laughed, But I think I do like dad jokes. My wife often says, "Oh dear, I think I'm losing my hearing," and I go, "Pardon?" And she always catches her out. Or one of my favorite pathetic jokes is, to enter a crowded lift, you know, and then say, now I expect you're wondering why I called you all here this afternoon, which really breaks the tension, you know. Not everybody laughs, but half of them do laugh.
It's situational, because laughter is like registering a shock and then the release after that, isn't it? Because people in a lift or an elevator, for our American listeners, are going to be in a state, and you're shocking and breaking the state to allow them to have a release. Well, we've reached the point in the show where we're going to do quick fire questions.
Quick fire questions.
Who's the funniest business person that you've met?
Well, I can think of two actually proper businessmen that I think are very funny. One is Howard Stringer, who's a friend from our kids were at the same prep school together. And he is the first, he's Welsh by provenance, the first non-Japanese ever to run the entire Sony corporation. So he's a big deal, ran CBS before that. He's very funny. And the other one is a much newer friend called Alan Scott, which is his pen name because he's a writer, and he's written everything from Don't Look Now, probably one of the greatest films ever made, Nick Rogue's great film, with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, and more recently The Queen's Gambit, which is this huge Netflix hit. He's still going.
Yeah, I've watched it. It's great.
But for many, many years, his day job was chairman of Macallan Whiskey. And he's also delightfully funny.
What book makes you laugh, John? You're surrounded by books, so I'm hoping that some of them make you laugh.
I don't tend to read funny books, really. I mean, I'm so busy doing QI research. I read serious things. I read dictionaries and encyclopedias and, you know, science and non-fiction on the whole.
What film makes you laugh?
This is not a funny film, really, but I like John Carpenter, the director, and Assault on Precinct 13 is a very, very scary police drama, very dark indeed, but there are some unbelievably good jokes in it. And that's another thing, that humor being part, I don't just sort of don't think anything counts unless it's got some humor in it. If it's not got any humor in it, there's something awry. It seems to be part of life to me, including religious stuff. You know, I think the very occasional funny vicar or funny Catholic priest, I think that's an amazing thing when they get it right, especially at funerals, you know, if people can tell jokes, which is another thing where, you know, isn't it interesting about humor and death is that, you know, obviously funerals are awful in so many ways, but the wake, when people let go and suddenly they're honest and they're making amends and they're forgiving each other and they're laughing. It's the most peculiar thing, that people laugh a great deal at funerals. I would say more than they do at weddings, where people are mainly sort of showing off their new hat and they're all young and in their prime. But at funerals, everyone's bereft and suddenly they're more human and they laugh. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because that takes us on to the next question. You talked about funerals and can be funny. What do you think is not funny?
I thought you were going to ask me what word makes me laugh.
Well, I will ask you that in a bit.
Well, this is a question that comes up a lot. And I don't think there's any subject that you can't be funny about if it's done right. I mean, there are lots of things in life that are not even slightly funny, but finding a funny response to anything is possible.
What word makes you laugh?
Well, I don't think you can go wrong with wobble bottom, but I don't know why I always find wobble bottom very funny. We did a sketch in Northern 9 o'clock news called Stout Life, and it was a parody of a program on London Weekend called Gay Life, and Stout Life was about people who were just slightly overweight and how badly treated they were by everybody, and wobble bottom was used in there. And Mel Smith would do this thing. He said, you know, what I mean is the kind of, it's very ahead of its time, very offense taking, you know, wokish sort of character. He said, that's the sort of thing that stout people is unfairly treated. I mean, for example, I heard a joke the other day. Orson Welles gets on a speak your weight machine and the machine says, "No coach parties, please." But I was going to share with you this thing. You've probably never even seen this. We did this book. Richard Curtis and I put this together for Comic Relief, the definitive Blackadder books and it's got all the scripts in there, but I did the bits in the middle, which are the little extra bits. And talking about silly words, this is Prince Regent's, a bit of a fop, as Hugh Laurie's Prince Regent.
Yeah.
His laundry list: Turtle and Son, Gentlemen's Launderers and Sprucers, 3 Bun Lane, Clerkenwell. So this, and it's got all these. So you've got sporrans, none. Kimonos informal, 3. Kimonos foul weather. Shoulderettes, 3. Scanties, 44. Folderols, 2. Skimpies, 9. Underskimpies, 9. Overskimpies, 4. Arbroath Smokies. Halterneck swagger flopsies, whoopsie-daisies, bosom hearties, log warmers, boleros, bobby knickers, varsity roasters, rap rascals, bunny lariats, todgerellos, billows, bufflers, bung nasties, ossops, otter tops, hair shirts, 0, sarongs, 4, squeamishes, 9, under squeamishes, 8, squirters, dinner dirndles, night panties, club dorises, slip goslings fur, slip goslings tweed, blouses, 52, chemises, chive clamps, hug bunters, dress nancies, swallow-breasted portscathos, scugs, 50, scrotals, 10, nipple loops, 2. Anyway, it just goes on. That makes me laugh. It's just pathetic. Complete.
Oh, it's superb. Absolutely superb. Oh God, that is hilarious. What sound makes you laugh?
What sound?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking when I was very small, when I first went to prep school, and I was sort of, quite shy, I suppose, and I had to read out something in geography, which contained the expression wood pulp. Was about logging in Canada or something, and I mispronounced it as wood plup. And I just completely lost it. I couldn't stop laughing for the whole of the rest of the lesson. I don't know why the sound of plup makes me laugh.
The Sound of Plup, which is a lovely album, and
Plup.
It's the name of Waiting for Smith's new album, The Sound of
Plup. Yeah.
2 grown men giggling. You went to Cambridge. Would you rather be considered clever or funny?
I don't think either. You may think this is a bit of a weird thing to say, but I try to do what I know to be right, or what I believe to be right, and not care what other people think. And I'm quite good at that. And I don't feel, I think it's very important to do the right thing. So I'd rather be considered kind. If people thought I was a kind person, I'd be happy with that. Because here's the thing, Paul, you can't take credit for being clever or really being funny. These are gifts that you're either born with, or they come to you because of your upbringing. Being kind, particularly to somebody who doesn't deserve it, that takes effort. And so that's something I think that's the only thing a person can take credit for, which is making an effort, doing it when you don't want to, doing it when it's difficult, being kind to people who don't deserve it, forgiving people who don't deserve it. That's a high calling. But clever, and it's like you can't take credit for being tall. That's what you are. And that's something that happened to me in my midlife crisis. I used to think it was important to be clever, to be right, to win, to come top, those things. I don't think those are important at all now. But being nice and generous and fair and helping people, that's what I like to do. I know it sounds pious, but it works for me,
I don't think it sounds pious at all. I think it's beautiful. And finally, John, desert island gags. If you could only take one joke with you to a desert island, what would it be?
Well, I would say the bear joke, which is my wife's favorite. It was far too rude to tell on. I can't. I'd be too embarrassed, and it's probably not even politically correct anymore. I don't know. There's a few, but since it's desert island gags, I'm going to tell you a desert island joke that I think is very good. It's one of my favorites. So a guy's got shipwrecked on one of those little desert islands, you know, a few palm trees and forests and a waterfall back there and so on. And he's there for a long time, and he's lonely, you know, but he builds a little shed and a hut, and he learns to grow some simple vegetables and catches his own fish. And he's, you know, but he's alone. And one day he's on the beach, and there's a human body washed up on the beach, on the sand, and it's a woman. And he turns her over, and she's just breathing. So he gives her CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and gets her. She gets conscious, and he takes her to a little hut and tucks her up in a simple bamboo blanket that he's woven himself. And eventually, after a long sleep, she wakes up. And my goodness, he looks at her, and it's Michelle Pfeiffer. Michelle Pfeiffer. My God, he's always admired her, and so. She's so grateful that he saved her life. And anyway, they're alone together, and they obviously become friends and eventually lovers. And they're passionately in love. She's the big love of his life, and vice versa. And they're very, very close. And one day they're sitting happy as anything by the little log fire in the evening. And this guy says, "Michelle, darling." And she says, "Yes, darling." He said, I wonder if it's a slightly strange thing I'm going to ask, but would you mind? She says, no, honestly, I love you. Whatever you want. No need to be ashamed. Ask me whatever you want. He said, well, it is rather odd. And she says, no, go on. So he pulls out this bit of charcoal from the fire, and he said, would you mind, Michelle, if I drew a little moustache on your top lip and called you Dave? And she goes, okay, yeah. No, fine, darling. Yes, of course. Okay, yes, go ahead. Let's do it. So he draws a little moustache on her top lip, and he says, Dave. And she says, yes. He says, Dave, you'll never guess who I'm sleeping with at the moment. Of course, it's really, you never guess who I'm fucking at the moment. But
yeah, no. Oh, no, it's a brilliant gag. It's a wonderful way to end the interview. Thank you, John, so much for being wonderfully cheerful and so kind. We really appreciate you being
Thank you, Paul. Show. It's been lovely. It's been lovely talking to you. Thanks for having me.
The Humourology podcast was hosted by Paul Boross and produced by Simon Banks. Music by Steve Hayworth, creative direction by Les Hughes, and additional research by Helen Sykes. Please remember to subscribe, like, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This has been a Big Sky production.